Welcome, everyone. I heard someone say, has the meeting begun? I'm letting people arrive, but let me welcome you. My name is Julia Isaacs, and I welcome you to this webinar, Developing Research Questions to Get Answers for Policy and Practice. This webinar kicks off a new series for CCDF agencies and others who work on childcare research and policy. The title for the series, the overall series, is Building Your Data and Research Skills to Answer Policy Questions. Next slide. As a housekeeping matter, I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will post the slides and the recording and the transcript online a few months after the webinar. Also, you'll notice that we have enabled closed captioning to make the webinar more accessible. So you can use that live transcript button at the bottom of your screen if you want to show or hide captions or adjust settings. We have about 150 people registered, and so all participants are muted. However, we do want to hear from you. And so please type your questions or comments into the chat box at any time. We'll have time for questions and a discussion with our panelists at the end of the webinar, but we'll pull up the questions that you make at any time. Next slide. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Child Care Research and Evaluation Capacity Building Center, which is supported through the Office of Planning, Research and Evaluation, OPRE, in the Administration for Children and Families, and it's managed by a contract with the Urban Institute in partnership with Mathematica. I'm Julia Isaacs of the Urban Institute, and I serve as project director. In a few minutes, I'll be turning moderation over to Gretchen Kirby from Mathematica, who's co-principal investigator and is leading today's webinar. Someone asked where the slides will be posted. On this slide, I'll say in a minute, it'll be posted on our webpage as well as the OPRE webpage. And I should add that we're happy to see in the chat, and I forgot to invite you to put your name and where you're from in the chat if you enjoy doing so. Where was I? I wanted to acknowledge the support of Alicia Blandon, who is our OPRE project officer. And just tell you that the center, our goal is to assess and build the research and evaluation capacity of Child Care and Development Funds, CCDF lead agencies. And to learn more about us or to see our materials, including we will be posting materials from this webinar, you can go to our Building Child Care Research Capacity webpage. And Peter, if you can add that to the chat. Also, if you Google Building Childcare Research Capacity, I think you will find our webpage. So before I turn things over to Gretchen and this great panel we have for you, I want to start with a couple of polls to learn more about you. So Ivy, if you bring those up, we want to know if you are state or territory CCDF lead agency staff, tribal CCDF lead agency staff. I guess you can read this: technical assistance providers, external researchers, federal agency staff, or others. And if you scroll down after you answer that question, you'll see our second question is, we also want to know what areas of CCDF do you want to learn more about through research and evaluation? Subsidies, quality improvement or quality rating improvement systems, childcare research and referral, or all of the above. So please do fill out our polls. So I'm seeing that that 37% of you are with state or territory CCDF lead agency staff, 2% tribal, 12% TA providers, 20% external researchers, 7% federal agency staff, and 22% other. And all of the above, 63% want to hear about research on all of the above. We also see 20% on quality improvement rating and improvement systems, 15% subsidies, and 2% child care resource and referral. Okay, well, Gretchen, I hope that will be informative, as I think I'm now going to turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Julia. And hello, everyone. I'm Gretchen Kirby, and I'm so pleased to be serving as the facilitator for this event. Today, we are discussing developing research questions to get answers for policy and practice. When we started thinking about the content for this event, I was a little concerned it would seem sort of simple. Then I was in a meeting and someone brought up this quote from Einstein, and it struck me that getting the question right is really hard to do. Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I would use the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. For once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. Now, we aren't going to do a research project in 5 minutes, but it's a powerful message to spend the time to figure out the right question to ask to solve your problem. As I was sort of looking around for some resources, I found a very brief article in Forbes from about 10 years ago that used this quote from Einstein and tells the story about the question that led to the cell phone. Why is it that when we want to call and talk to a person, we have to call a place? Peter's going to put the link to that article in the chat just for some quick fun reference. That article highlights some points that you're going to hear about today. Pause to consider your problem or issue. Think about the people and consider what would really make a difference. This all made me think that asking the right question is not just a step in a research study. It's a step toward being creative and innovative and getting answers and solving problems to make things better for people, which is what we all are trying to work for. So with this in mind, let me give you an overview of what we will cover today and the panelists who will be sharing information with you. We will begin with Heather Zaveri of Mathematica, who will talk about what's in a question by detailing the qualities of strong research questions and providing examples. She will also ask all of you to participate in identifying qualities of some research, some example research questions at the end of her presentation. Then we will hear from Kathryn Kigera, who's with the Office of the State Superintendent of Education in the District of Columbia. And she will talk about the CCDF agency experience in developing research questions. Next, we will have a panel discussion with Heather, Kathryn, and Tonya Williams, who is with the Arkansas Department of Human Services. And last, but importantly, we will address questions from you. But as Julia said, you don't need to wait until the end to ask your questions. Please post questions or comments in the chat box as they occur to you. Our panelists and myself will try to answer quick clarifying questions as they can in the chat, and other questions we will save for discussion at the end. Now I'd like to introduce Heather. Heather is a Senior Director in Human Services at Mathematica, leading the unit's Learning and Strategy Group. She oversees staff who specialize in providing technical assistance and support to strengthen human service programs. Heather has led many efforts that partner with federal and local organizations to improve their ability to conduct continuous quality improvement and use data and evidence for decision-making. So Heather, I will turn it to you.
Great, thank you so much, Gretchen, and thank you all for having me on the webinar today. I'm really excited to be talking with everybody about what's in a question and offering some qualities to consider as you are developing research questions for your evaluations. Next slide. So I want to start by talking about key steps in the process for developing research questions. And you're going to see as you hear these steps in developing research questions, a really important point that I think underscores the quote Gretchen was talking about, but a really important point about taking the time to be intentional and thoughtful upfront when developing research questions, because this really allows you and supports you in developing and conducting high quality, productive, and effective research that will guide and improve your program moving forward. So when thinking about developing research questions, you can think almost about 4 parts of a process. And this includes taking that time to pause and reflect, to thinking carefully about what you want to know, thinking about identifying why you want to know it, and for whom knowing that information would be helpful. As you go through this reflection process, it can be really important to brainstorm a range of topics with a range of individuals. You want to include staff, partners, community members, or even families as you think about what topics are important and why would you want to know it. Sometimes this brainstorming process can really lead to more topics or more questions than you can answer, which can involve then needing to prioritize which questions you can answer. To do this, you can think about urgency or the value that that question would offer in terms of informing your program improvement and decision making. Then, as you go through that prioritization process, you also will want to be assessing the strength of questions. And you can assess the strength of questions based on a set of qualities that I'm going to talk about throughout the rest of my presentation. Now, I do want to say that as you develop research questions, it's very rare that research questions are something we develop once and never revisit. And so it is kind of an iterative process and one that where you want to be working to improve and refine questions as you go. So you might be asking, next slide, please. You might be asking yourself right now, why this focus on research questions? Well, a strong research question is really the first and a connecting piece in high quality research. A strong research question helps to connect the purpose of your research to the information and methods, and it puts people at the center of it all. You need to think about all of these pieces to feed into your question development. And as you put these pieces together, it will allow you to develop questions that will produce answers to inform policy and practice. So developing a strong research question is an important first step in conducting high quality research and evaluation. So let's first review some of the features of high quality research and evaluation, since these pieces are really intertwined and rely on one another. And as we talk about questions, we'll talk about how they're all connected. So as you think about high quality research and evaluation, you want to be thinking about the purpose of your research. And when you're thinking about purpose, it's really kind of that big picture statement or idea of what you are trying to do or accomplish. That purpose really helps to then inform your research question. Your research question is what specifically you're looking to answer through the research. As you identify your question, you really want to be articulating for yourself why this is a key question for your program at this point in time. Also, as you think about your research question, you want to be thinking about the methods you're going to be using to answer that question. Asking yourself if the methods that are available to you, are they appropriate for answering the question at hand? You do want to make sure there's alignment between the research question you're asking and the methods you have accessible to answer the question. And then related to methods is your information. And this is really the accessible information that you have on hand or that you can gather to help answer that research question. And so it's all four of these that really fit together when you're conducting high quality research. And at the start, it's good to think about these even at a high level because they all just kind of reinforce each other. This process can be an iterative process where you develop your research questions, you consider what it means for how you will answer it, you think about your data collection capacity, and then you circle back to see if all the pieces align. If you find they don't align, well, that's a place where you want to revise and then kind of revise and think about it and keep assessing till you have alignment between the purpose, the question, the methods, and the information. So next, I want to talk about qualities of strong research questions connected to these features. And as I do that, we'll share lots of examples to really illustrate how this goes. Next slide. So a key to developing a strong research question is to ensure it clearly connects to and articulates the purpose of the research you're conducting. Strong research questions, to do this, strong research questions will represent kind of three qualities, which are the questions relevant, useful, and focused. What we mean by this is when it comes to questions being relevant, is that questions should address a topic that is of interest for your program to best serve children and families. Each of your programs operates in contexts that are unique. And so the questions you're asking in your research should be tied to the situation in your program, what you want to know at this point in time, or what you think your partners and others in the community might be most interested in knowing. In terms of the quality of usefulness, this really means that the answers to a question can point to some actionable steps that will support decision-making and improvements for your program. The answers to the question would help the children's families and providers served by your program. And then finally, equality is focused. And this really means that each question being asked should focus on a single topic or problem. You want each question to be targeted so that you're not trying to do too much with one single question. So developing research questions, next slide please. Developing research questions begins with the purpose. So this helps you to ensure that your question meets those three qualities of being relevant, useful to answer, and focused on a single topic. So when you think about the purpose, you're not thinking about your research question. You're thinking about that more big picture, what you're trying to address through your overall research and evaluation. And this is really, so your purpose is really that big picture need for information that starts or kicks off your process for developing a research question. On this slide, we show topics and examples for each topic of how your purpose could be tied and start to kick off that process of identifying research questions. So for example, if the purpose of your research is to seek or assess solutions to problems, you might start with a big picture question around how might we attract and support a qualified workforce. If your purpose is to explore assumptions about the need for or provision of services, you might be interested in looking at how might we understand the unmet demand for childcare for infants and toddlers in our community. If you are looking to explore or test a change in implementation or a policy, you might want to look specifically at how might you increase subsidies to help families access childcare. Or say you want to spark innovation, you want to try something new, you want to identify new strategies. Here you might be thinking about something like how might we get information to families to help them access and use subsidies. So you can see from this that identifying your purpose really lays the foundation for helping you get to strong research questions. And with your purpose in mind, you can move on to developing research questions based on the qualities we have talked about so far of whether your question is relevant, useful, and focused. So now let's turn to some examples of research questions built from a clearly stated purpose. So on this slide, we're going to start with one of the purposes talked about on the prior slide. So say your purpose of your research that you're conducting is you want to look at how might we get information to families to help them access and use subsidies. And now you're ready to start building your research question. So now the slide's going to show a couple of example questions, and we're going to evaluate each question for whether the question is meeting the qualities talked about so far. So the first example question is what are the ways to get information to families to help them access and use subsidies? I'm going to think, what qualities do I see in this question? Well, I think this question is relevant. It's useful because answers to this question can point to specific strategies about the type of information families might want or need. This example asks about the family experience. I just jumped ahead. And so intended to help meet the needs of the family. But this question is broad. It's hard to know what information to collect. This question, when I look at it, it's actually framed almost more like a brainstorming and not a research question. So I wouldn't think this is a super strong question. So let's go to the second example. This question is, what information has been most useful to families who have received subsidies? And what do families say confuses them about getting subsidies? So when I think about this question, I evaluate it. Well, I think, again, it's relevant, like the first question. And this question is also useful. It's useful because answers to this question can point to specific strategies about the type of information families might want or need. These examples ask about the family experience. What's worked retrospectively for families who have successfully accessed subsidies, and asks families about obstacles, both of which can inform next steps for improvement. But I think we can do better, I'm going to say. So let's turn to example number 3. So here's the third example. This example question is, what information has been most useful to families with infants who have consistently received subsidies? And how and where did they get this information? So you can see if you're comparing example 2 to example 3 gets more focused. So this question is really just about families with children of a particular age, those infants, and just about experiences of families who have both accessed and consistently used subsidies. And taken together, these two questions really clarify the interest in learning about the types of information, as well as the mechanism for getting that information to families. So hopefully you can see through these examples that with a purpose, it helps to set your high-level need for information, and it can help you turn and develop a series of research questions. And as you work to develop those research questions, you want to keep focused on whether your questions are relevant, useful, and focused. Okay, so with the start of a question on a particular topic that's relevant and useful, you can move to the next steps in developing your research question. And this is by adding in additional qualities to consider as you develop a research question. The next qualities I want to talk about connect to the information you will need, how you will collect and analyze it to produce actionable information. Again, we have 3 additional qualities to consider. These are that your question is not too simple, that your question is specific, and that it's feasible. So let's talk about what we mean about each of these. So in terms of the quality of not too simple, this is really saying that your research questions should not be too simple. You should really avoid asking a simple yes/no question as a research question. You also want to make sure that the question you're asking requires some sort of data collection to answer the question. So it shouldn't be a question you already know the answer to. In terms of the quality of specific, research questions should also be specific and not too broad. They should focus on clearly defined objectives, outcomes, and a time point. It should be clear from your research question what you are going to assess, what time period you're going to look at. So for example, you will want to specify what you mean by words in questions such as quality or access. So it's really clear in the question how you will measure and what you mean by important outcomes such as that. And then the final quality on this slide is feasible. This means that you must be able to answer the questions using the information you have or you can get within the planned time period. Sometimes we are interested in questions that are just not feasible for us to answer because they might require information we don't have or that we may not be able to get access to within the time period that we have for our study. So building on the quality of whether a research question is, next slide please, is feasible. You want to assess if your research question is feasible for collecting the needed information to address this question. And this slide offers a few questions you can ask yourself to help consider this feasibility. So as you're assessing feasibility, you can ask yourself questions like, how well can the information capture the voices or experiences of those with an interest or investment in the topic we're studying? You can also ask yourself, how available and easy is it to collect the information you'd need to answer this question? And finally, you can ask, how much can the information contribute to refining your program or making decisions? And answering questions like this can really help you to assess this quality of feasibility of your question and support you in how to refine the question if needed. So let's look back at the example question we started to build earlier and continue to assess whether this question, how this question is stacking up against these additional qualities we've talked about. So as a reminder, the question we're going to pull from that we looked at before is, what information has been most useful to families with infants who have consistently received subsidies, and how and where did they get this information? So first, let's assess, is this question, is it not too simple? Well, it's not a yes or no question, and I think it would require collecting some information to help answer it. So we're going to say, yes, this question is not too simple. Next, we want to ask, is it specific? So this question, I will say, could be more specific, particularly if you define the phrase in there, consistently received, by adding a time frame. So let's think about a revised question that we could do to add more specificity to this question. Yep. So here's an example on the slide of how you might tweak that first question there to make it more specific. So an improved version of the question could be, what information has been most useful to families with infants who have received subsidies without a break over the past 6 months? So you can see it was a quote unquote small change that instead of saying consistently received, being more specific by clarifying without a break over the past 6 months will help you be more specific and really clarify what it is you're looking at. So then the final quality we want to assess is if the question is feasible for information collection. And I want to think to those questions we asked in that slide before. So this information to answer this question can likely be collected in a reasonable time period. So that would mean it's feasible. Information to this question would also capture the voices of families, another aspect of feasible for information collection. You can also identify families who have consistently received subsidies from your CCDF administrative data. And that means you'll be able to collect or identify and collect needed information from these families. And then you can ask yourself, will the information help to point to next steps? And I think that probably if we answer this question, it would help to point you to some next steps for your program. So overall, I think it is really addressing this, meeting these qualities of whether or not it's feasible. If you are not confident about any of these elements to feasibility, again, you will want to go back to revise your question to point you to data or information that would be feasible and useful for you to collect in this time period. So you also want to construct your question to align with feasibility in the method. This is really how to answer the question appropriately in a way that matches your interest and capacity for data collection and analysis. Each of the statements on this slide really talk about or highlight a different method or approach to answering a question. And thinking about these can help inform how you construct or phrase your research question to align with your ability and capacity to analyze information so that it's appropriate to the intended method. So for example, you might be interested in exploring how your program or services are provided and how they can be improved. And often this is done through what we call a descriptive study. Alternatively, you might want to look at how outcomes for children, families, providers, or your workforce change over time to identify or develop promising strategies. Sometimes this is called an outcome study. Or you might want to determine whether a policy change or an intervention caused or led to positive outcomes, particularly if you have an appropriate comparison group to draw those comparisons for. And sometimes we call this an impact study. And your well-crafted research question that reflects the purpose and method will point you to the right approach for getting the information you need using a method that aligns with what you can feasibly do. So let's, in this next slide, build on this idea of questions aligned to methods by adding in some examples. So in the first bullet, which was this descriptive study where you're looking to describe services to learn about what can improve, an example research question that really is consistent with that approach would be something like, what information has been most useful to families with infants who have consistently received subsidies without a break over the past 6 months? So that's that question we've been focusing on so far. But what if your study was looking to assess outcomes? What might the question be? Here, the question might be, how does consistency in subsidy use over a 6-month period change for families with infants after we introduce tailored help navigating a subsidy system? Or what if you want to determine effect? Remember, this is where you really need a comparison group. Here, a research question might say something like, how does consistency in subsidy use over a 6-month period for families with infants who have received tailored help navigating the subsidy system compare to families that do not receive this help? So with that, you can kind of see how that research question really gets tailored to reflect that method so that one can kind of see how you might be assessing the question through the way it's worded. So the last aspect of a research question, next slide, please. The last aspect of a research question that we wanted to take some time to highlight is how to think about equity when thinking about research questions. And I want to say equity is not a quality of research question, because I really think of it as something as much more broad and pervasive almost of when you're thinking about what your research questions are. And that is, so when you're thinking about equity, you really want to think about how it's being built into all aspects of your research and evaluation. When it comes to your research questions, you can really be thinking about how you're framing or the types of questions you're asking to ensure that equity is front and center in your research. You can do this by asking questions that really highlight the need to dig deep. You want your questions to get you to look to understand more than the average experience in your program. You want your questions to help you understand how children, families, and providers with a range of characteristics and experiences, what their experiences are in your program, what their outcomes are, so that you're really getting that broader perspective. As you do this, you might think about and be asking about for whom a policy or practice will work and how. You might ask why a policy or a practice might be experienced differently or produce different outcomes for some children and families, but not for others. Or you might ask why whether services are equitably delivered and benefits are equitably realized. As you think about building research questions that are really centered in equity, it can be really important to bring in a range of perspectives to help inform and create these questions. This really goes back to that very first slide when I talked about steps in the process and that brainstorming step and bringing in lots of voices and perspectives to that brainstorming step. And that's one of those critical reasons why is to think about equity. Next slide. So as you consider equity, I wanted to offer an example before I turn it over to you to help evaluate some questions. So here's an example of a research question that could be tailored to better incorporate equity. So if in our example question, we have what information has been most useful for families with infants who have consistently received subsidies? Question we've been revisiting. So if you wanted to tailor this question to make sure it's addressing equity, you might consider incorporating questions such as, what are characteristics of families with infants who have received subsidies without a break over the past 6 months? But then you might want to also make sure you're asking, how might their experience be different from other families? And I think it's that second question that really helps to make sure you're thinking broadly and gathering experiences about the understanding the experiences of a range of families in your programs. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to you all, because a lot of information we've just covered. And on the next slide, I'm going to ask you to help apply some of what we just talked about. And the first thing we're going to do, and we're going to use the chat for both this slide and the next slide. So what we want you to do here on this slide in green, there are 3 research questions. And I want you to read these. I'm going to read them myself in a second, but I want you to read these and think about which of the questions is strongest. And what we mean by strongest is, which of these questions do you think reflects the most of these qualities that we've been talking about so far? So as a reminder, these qualities are your question relevant, useful, focused, not too simple, specific, and feasible. So the 3 questions I want you to think about is there, first question is there unmet demand for childcare slots for infants and toddlers? The second question is, how do families learn about subsidies? What information do they use to select quality care? And the third question is, how will completion of training and education among teachers and childcare centers that receive CCDF subsidies change over the next year with the launch of our new professional development system? So of those 3 questions in the chat, put the number of the question that you think is the strongest. And all you need to do in the chat is just put the number, put 1, 2, or 3. Which question do you think is the strongest? Okay, I see quite a few people are saying number 3, and quite a few people, a couple of people are saying number 2. So nobody's gone number 1 so far, but we've got a few people on 2 and more on 3. So let's take each of these questions. So for question number 1, is there unmet demand for childcare slots for infants and toddlers? I agree. This question is not super strong. Does anybody in the chat want to write how might we improve this question, or what qualities that we've talked about do you think are not represented in this question? So you might ask, so it's too simple. It's almost a yes or no question. Exactly. It's not open-ended. It's a simple yes or no answer. What about, is this a specific question? Does it seem focused and specific, or does it seem pretty broad? Yep, broad. Thank you, April. Okay, so yeah, so I agree. So I think number 1, no one had put it, and I agree that I think this question, it's not clear if it's relevant and useful to those who are implementing without more specificity to identify issues. Okay, so then let's look at question number 2. A few of you thought that this question might be the strongest. If you thought this question was the strongest, can you put in the chat why? Okay, I think someone wrote, it seems kind of broad. What is it that you guys liked in this question? It has 2 ideas, subsidies and quality care. Yep. One of the things that when I thought about this question is I wondered how focused it was. Okay, so Philip, thank you. You thought it was focused, relevant, and specific. Great, thank you. One of the things when I look at this question is I wonder it is specific, but how specific is it? Or is there something you could do to make it more specific? So for example, that select quality care, that feels like something that you might be able to tweak to make it be more specific about what do you mean about quality care. Also, I think when you think about this question, you might want to think about the usefulness that without further definition on terms such as quality care, it might not be as clear about how you could use information from this question. I'm going to just talk quickly so we can move on about the third question. I think the third question was a example that included both, in that it was both focused and specific. The answer to the third question probably was going to be useful, and it was set up in a way that the information could be feasible to answer and information would be feasible to gather. A way you might have tweaked the third question is to add on an additional question that really focused on the characteristics of teachers and centers to help assess equity within this question. Okay, so now let's move on to the last slide. And on this slide, we're going to again look at the qualities that you see in a research question. We're only going to do on this slide, just because of time, we're only going to do 1 of 2 questions. So Ivy, can you click twice now? Okay, so this second question, the one that is in the black text right now, I want us to focus on that. I'm going to read it, and then I want you to, in the chat again, enter the qualities you see in this research question. And the research question we have is, how does access to families' care of their choice vary for families that receive subsidies across geographic areas or by race and ethnicity? And what are reasons for the differences? So for this, what qualities do you see in this question? Great. Sandra, thank you so much for highlighting that as your first one. I agree. I love that this question had that second part in particular, that it really centers and addresses equity by asking what are reasons for the differences. So thanks for highlighting that. And then I see others are writing in. They see that in this question, it's focused, specific. It's not too simple. It's relevant. Thank you, Joanne. I agree. It's nice that it's specific because it really highlights particular or specific families. Yep, Philip, great. Yep, it's useful, specific, and focused. So great. So I really appreciate how everyone's highlighting and using those qualities to help us assess research questions. So now I think I'm going to pass it back to Gretchen, and you're going to move us along. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you so much, Heather, for your helpful framing and our steps to keep in mind. Before we turn to Kathryn, I did want to pause for a second and try to address a couple things that have come through in the chat quickly. Kimberly Lucas asked if we had resources to help better support integration of an equity lens throughout the development of a research proposal. We do not have those resources connected to this webinar, but I know that there are a lot of resources out there. We can try to address that question through some other means, but there's also some specific webinars that have been going on around embedding issues of equity in research evaluations. And also April Westerman asked, would you have the research question and then have an additional question that addresses equity with the main question? Yes, I think as you've seen in the examples that Heather's given, there's unlikely to be just one research question, and that you are likely to add a series of questions that help get you to the qualities that Heather's gone through, and particularly to address issues of equity. So yes, we are suggesting that there could be a series of questions. With that, I think I'm going to go ahead and move us along to the next slide. And I have the pleasure to introduce Kathryn Kigera, who is going to share the experience of the DC CCDF agency in developing research questions. Kathryn is the Director of Quality Initiatives in the Division of Early Learning at the DC Office of the State Superintendent of Education. Kathryn oversees Capital Quality, which is DC's redesigned quality rating and improvement system, DC Childcare Connections, which is DC's childcare resource and referral service, Early Head Start childcare partnerships, and research initiatives and workforce enhancement and development programs. Kathryn has led innovative research and program design over the course of her career. And with that, I will turn it to you, Kathryn.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to join you today and to talk a little bit about the work that DC has done with regard to research and through partnerships. If we move to the 2 slides. Thank you. So today I will provide an overview of the DC childcare landscape, how we have gone about the development of research questions and lessons that we have learned along the way. Next slide, please. And the next one. Thank you. DC has 488 licensed child development facilities. 383 of those facilities are center-based and 105 are home-based. More than half of facilities, 267, accept subsidy vouchers. These numbers are continuously changing, but are always available on our website, My Childcare DC. So the information that you're seeing on this slide is based on 2020 census data and retrieved from Kids Count Data Center. Groupings with NA or 0% are not included here. And as you can see, DC is quite diverse. More than half of the population is Black. Overall in DC, the majority of adults and children are people of color. And on this slide, you will see the wide range in median income of families with children ages 0 to 17 across the wards or smaller jurisdictions within the District of Columbia. On the right side, we have a map of the city showing the locations of each of the 8 wards. On the left side, we show the median income for each of the 8 wards that range from a low of 35,907 in Ward 8 in the southeast corner of DC, up to 250,000 plus in Ward 3, which is located in the northwest part of the city. The lowest median income by large margins are found in Ward 7 and 8. And again, these are the 2020 data that come from Kids Count Data Center DC. We wanted to give you a picture of what DC looks like before we dove into the development of research questions and how we go about that. So given DC and the vast variance in demographics across the district, it's important to ensure that our programs are meaningful for the community we serve. In order to evaluate our programs and focus on continuous improvement, there are several things that we take into consideration as we develop research questions. So here you see the system approach to child health, development, education, and well-being. This was developed over the course of a year with engagement from the State Early Childhood Development Coordinating Council, the Quality Improvement Network Interagency Steering Committee, the Early Childhood Innovation Network, Raise DC, and other key stakeholders. This was an iterative process, and we wanted to ensure that all stakeholders in early childhood saw their work reflected in the system-wide approach. And this really serves as a basis for what we do and how we do it and how we communicate what we do. As a district, our aim is to improve outcomes for children beginning at birth and throughout their childhood by addressing racial and social inequities in DC. Each limb of the teddy bear represents different indicators to reach the overarching goal: collective actions, performance indicators, neighborhood indicators, and family and community indicators. This approach serves as the backdrop for the work we do in our programs and how we think about and measure success, areas for improvement, and areas for focus. A link to the full PDF of the system approach that includes additional information will be shared with you in the chat.
The slide is titled, "How do we move from the big picture to research questions?" The slide image focuses on the arm of the teddy bear with the heading of performance indicators. The slide is narrated by the presenter.
So now we're going to dive in a little bit into one of the arms of the teddy bear. We often refer to this as the teddy bear. It helps us think about how we approach and how we study the programs that we implement. As I mentioned, one core component of the systems approach are the performance indicators. Several performance indicators are listed in the full version of the systems approach and include improved quality of early learning environments, strengthened partnerships and communication with parents to enhance knowledge, increased access to quality resources, referrals, and supports, improved program participation and outcomes, increased successful linkage to needed services and supports, improved diversity and equity of outcomes in programs and services, and all of the above performance indicators are relevant to the work that we do in the Division of Early Learning at the DC Office of the State Superintendent of Education, or OSSE. The next thing we considered is how we, OSSE, can further understand if we are on a path toward meeting the performance indicators. We want to further understand the implementation and impacts of capital quality, which is DC's quality rating and improvement system that was piloted in 2016 and fully implemented in fall of 2018, which is formerly fiscal year 2019 for us. We also want to further understand subsidy innovations and perceived impacts of those innovations and policies. We are fortunate in that we have the support of the Urban Institute to study these two areas through 2 partnership grants with the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. For purposes of this discussion, we'll focus primarily on capital quality as I speak more to the development of our questions. Now I'll move into how we develop the research questions to better understand the perceived impact of capital quality. And I'll start with a brief overview of what capital quality is and what it does. As I mentioned, it's DC's quality rating and improvement system for childcare facilities. It was piloted several years ago and reached full implementation in fiscal year 2019. There are 4 major program components: one-on-one technical assistance by a quality facilitator, completion of a continuous quality improvement plan, a public-facing profile on My Childcare DC, and a capital quality designation. The capital quality designation is based on observation data using the classroom assessment scoring system and environment rating scales. I now want to dig in a little deeper and share a theory of change. So we have the teddy bear, which is the overarching approach to early childhood in DC. And then we have our program, which we also have a theory of change for. This has supported us in thinking about what we hope to learn from research and served as a reference point as we developed research questions and throughout the iterative process of developing the research questions and revising them. We see capital quality as impacting childcare leaders, practitioners, as well as home, family, and community. For leaders, we hope to improve working conditions, staff retention, and business practices. For practitioners, we hope to improve care and learning environments and engagement of families and the community. When considering home, family, and community, we strive towards child health and school readiness, as well as supporting early learning opportunities in the home, with family, and within the community. Ultimately, we want to ensure all children in the district receive an equitable and quality early care and education experience and improve outcomes for young children, their families, and the community that they live in. Please remember that our approach is to provide supports and opportunities to childcare leaders with the understanding that they will share this information with the educators, thereby impacting the entire early care and education ecosystem within the facility and community. A link to our full theory of change will also be shared in the chat. And I know we're getting short on time, so I'm moving as quickly as I can. So how did we move to develop questions based on what we hope to see? We work closely with the Urban Institute to develop these questions. The development of research questions is and should be an iterative process. It is okay to reframe questions along the way based on early outcomes or unanticipated events. So here you see the original questions. How does the overall supply and distribution of child development centers and homes change as capital quality rolls out across the district? How does capital quality affect teacher job satisfaction and retention? How does capital quality affect parental choice? And do children attending programs with higher quality ratings have better developmental outcomes than those attending programs with lower quality ratings? Not all of our questions changed. The first question stayed the same. However, the remaining questions were tweaked a bit and now are: how do centers and home caregivers perceive capital quality and its relation to quality and supply? How does capital quality affect career pathways and staff retention? How does capital quality affect parental child care search and selection? And as I mentioned, this is an iterative process, and after discussions, piloting and testing of tools, etc., questions were modified, and we also learned a lot. I will talk more about that when we get to the next slide, when we talk about lessons learned. So the Urban Institute is investigating these questions for us through the Administration for Children and Families and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It is a grant award, as I mentioned. Okay, so here's what we learned. People are more likely to respond if incentives are offered. So even relevant and well-motivated research questions require supports to get participation, given the time and effort people have to put in to participate in research. We also acknowledge that we value their time. Vetting and testing research tools prior to fielding is key. Research questions should be flexible and developed through an iterative process, for example, through testing and piloting, like we've talked about previously. It is important to maintain interim communication with the research partner as well as external stakeholders while the research remains ongoing. It is ideal to set up opportunities to get early answers to research questions, even if full answers might take more time. The Urban Institute has made it a point to release shorter topic-based briefs throughout the study that benefit us as an agency, but also the field as a whole, because they are accessible to all. A link to the Urban Institute Partnership Study webpage will be shared in the chat. Anecdotally, coronavirus or COVID-19 affected research activities and response rates. Context changes and results and responses may also change as a result. Then there are changes in policy that can affect the applicability of research findings to the current landscape. Due to changes, you may not get exactly what you expect out of research, but that does not mean that it is in vain or that there are not things we can learn from it. There are. If policy changes during a research project occur, it may offer an opportunity to compare pre-change data to post-change data, for example, that could either support the change or provide information that may result in reconsidering the policy entirely. So with all of that said, I wanted to highlight a question that had unanticipated findings. How does capital quality affect career pathways and staff retention? So childcare providers noted that the program should focus more resources on program staff. This is not aligned to our theory of change, in which leaders are provided support so that they are better able to support their educators. Some educators who responded were also not familiar with the capital quality program at all, and we know that they're in capital quality participating facilities. So reflecting on this, what does it mean? It does not mean that the question is bad necessarily. It does not mean that the theory of change needs to be adjusted either. However, when we think about a programmatic response, this meant that we needed to better communicate the capital quality program, the model, supports in place, and the theory of change. The development process for research questions is extremely important, but it is equally important to ensure that it is an ongoing and continuous improvement process in terms of the questions, the research itself, and within the program. Thank you.
The slide shows contact information for Dr. Kathryn Kigera. The office address is 1050 First Street Northeast, Washington, D.C. 20002. Her email address is Kathryn.Kigera, that's Kathryn .Kigera @dc.gov. The social media sites are facebook.com/OSSEDC, twitter.com/OSSEDC, youtube.com/DC Education, all one word, and the agency website is www.osse.dc.gov.
So thank you so much, Kathryn, for sharing your experience with us. And now we're going to turn to our panel discussion on developing research questions. So in addition to Heather and Kathryn, who you've heard from, we are being joined by Tonya Williams, who's joining us for the panel. Tonya serves as the Director of the Division of Childcare and Early Childhood Education in the Arkansas Department of Human Services. And she has served in that role for more than 15 years and is responsible for overseeing childcare and residential licensing, the Better Beginnings Quality Improvement System for Early Education, and administering several federal programs that serve young children and families. Tonya has worked in early childhood education for more than 27 years, serving in several leadership roles. And before we start our discussion, I wanted to give Tonya a minute to provide some context about the CCDF program in Arkansas, and then we'll start our panel. So Tonya, I'll turn it to you for a minute.
Great, thank you, Gretchen, and thanks for inviting Arkansas to be a part of this today. I just want to set a little bit of context for Arkansas. We're fortunate to work with several research partners, but in terms of our programs, we have around 2,000 licensed programs in Arkansas, which includes family child care and center-based care across the state. We are a state that requires participation in our tiered quality rating and improvement system called Better Beginnings here. And so about 1,952 of our programs are actively participating in Better Beginnings. About 2/3 of our providers are participating in the subsidy program. So they actually take child care development funds for subsidy purposes. And I'll stop there, Gretchen. I can talk a little bit about our research question, or we can pause for questions there.
Sure, thank you, Tonya. I think we will go ahead and turn to our set of questions. And in the interest of time, we are going to focus responses from Kathryn and Tonya so we can get the state perspective. Ivy, if you could turn to the next slide. Our first question is, what is an example of a recent research question you explored and how the results led you to change your program implementation or next steps for research? Kathryn, could you start us off with this question? I know it connects to your presentation, and then we'll go back to Tonya, who can provide more context for her work.
Sure, that sounds great. So like Gretchen said, I spoke a little bit about this during the presentation as well, but through the research partnership, we learned that there was work to be done around communicating our capital quality theory of change and the intent of the program to a greater extent. We also realized we need to find additional opportunities to discuss the program with educators specifically because they were not aware of it at all.
Thank you, Kathryn. Tonya, would you like to address this question?
Yeah, just from our standpoint, we do have a lot of research that we're doing, but I wanted to talk about one specific. It has to do with the policy that came out of the reauthorization of the Child Care Development Block Grant, really trying to minimize disruptions to children. So we focused on expulsions and suspensions in early childhood with our research project. We have a whole support system called Behavior Help, and we really wanted to know, does that Behavior Help system reduce the number of suspensions or expulsions in early childhood settings?
Thank you, Tonya. Our second question is, how have you built equity for children, families, or providers into your development of research questions? And I think we were going to start with Tonya for this one.
Yeah, so for us, I think, getting familiar with your data, understanding what the baseline data is. I think nationally, there's a lot of research on expulsion and suspension in early childhood, and our data in Arkansas did not track the way national data does. We do see inequity with boys, but we don't see equity across minority populations like we expected to. That could be because we work very closely with all of our early childhood programs, and there's maybe a safety or networking capacity research relationship based to the programs, and they're willing to work with us, but we're not seeing the same data. I can paste the research in the chat box so that people can take a look at it, but it has helped us really look at, is there equity, inequity? Certainly we've seen it for boys versus girls more than any other category at this point.
Thank you, Tonya. Kathryn, what would you like to say in response to this question?
Yes, and my response to this question is a combination of this question and the next question, so please bear with me. But working with the Urban Institute has been great, and the research that they conduct is very intentional. One of the ways that equity is built into the process is also a result of stakeholder engagement early on. So we currently have, as I mentioned, 2 research projects with the Urban Institute that are OPRE partnership projects. And we're looking at capital quality, as I discussed, but also our subsidy program. And they have been meeting with key stakeholders to get their perspective on the program and to make sure that they are asking the right questions. As a part of the process, the Urban Institute is also piloting a bank of questions to families to help inform which questions are most appropriate for the full study, as well as how questions should be worded or framed to ensure that the questions are interpreted in the way intended. We know that language matters, audience matters, and being very intentional early on in the process matters a great deal. And also, I discussed this with our partners at the Urban Institute, and they highlighted the importance of the research team members reflecting the population participating in focus groups or interviews as well, because building trust and including stakeholders in the process just in general is very important.
Thank you, Kathryn. Tonya, would you like to add a response to the last question about who you've involved in developing your questions?
So, certainly work with the staff here in the Division of Child Care and Early Childhood Education, but our research partners obviously are a part of that, but also early childhood programs that we're working with have been a part of that. I think if we look to the future, one of the parts that I think we had a lessons learned is we were really focused with our research partners. And now we're really looking more broadly at our professional development system and those partners as a part of it, because they've really been involved in the responses and supports in the behavioral health system that have helped us, help children and programs really be more able to serve a child who might be experiencing a trauma or some sort of behavioral challenge. So I think bringing in more technical assistance and professional development partners in the future as a part of that, and looking at those questions, as they may have a different perspective about the work that they're doing with programs and the training and questions that they're getting from the field.
Thank you so much. So now we have some time for your questions. We welcome questions you have for any of the panelists and hope we can particularly hear from CCDF Lead Agency staff. Just a reminder, to ask a question, you can type it in the chat box. While you're thinking of your question, I will, if you have any, I'm going to turn it to Heather if you have any sort of overarching reflections or parting words, Heather.
Thanks, Gretchen. I think it was really interesting listening to Kathryn and Tonya talk on the panel. And as they were talking, I was thinking about what qualities was I hearing in what they were saying about the research they both have worked on in their communities. I think when I was hearing Kathryn, when you were talking, I was really loving your point around iterating on questions, that it's really underscoring that important point that oftentimes our research questions are not something we develop once and then just move forward, that there is a natural process of refining them to make sure you get to the right question, and then appreciating when external events happen like COVID, sometimes we need to revisit them again. I also really appreciated hearing about how you draw on multiple voices, that it sounds like it's such a strong partnership between you and Urban Institute in defining what to answer, how to use the information, but then also really drawing in the voices of the families and the perspectives of the families that are being served, both through helping to define what questions to ask and then doing that important check of, are they, are the questions you're asking resonating with them, or do they need to be tweaked to better resonate for clarity? So that was all really great. And then Tonya, when you were talking about the research project on expulsion, it was really hearing in that those qualities we're talking about relevance and usefulness to your program and how that really came out. And then also, I think an important point around equity and how you really dug deep into those findings to explore what those experiences were and were there differences for kids with different types of characteristics. And so that point you bring up around seeing those differences based on gender really align with that focus on equity.
Thank you so much, Heather. If anyone has even just some reflections they'd like to share in the chat, you can feel free to do so. In the meantime, I will go to our last slide. Before we end, we would like to share some resources that can help with developing research questions, including how to develop the right research questions for program evaluation. This resource provides steps for developing research questions and logic models and writing research questions for different types of evaluations. We also have how to write a research question, and this resource presents types, steps, and examples for writing research questions. And Peter is putting links to both of those resources in the chat. Today's event, as Julia mentioned at the start of our session, is the first in a planned 3-part series on building your data and research skills to answer policy questions. Our next event in the series will be Getting Help Answering Your Policy Questions, How to Plan for Research Procurement, and that will be held on September 13th. Registration information will be available soon for that event. The last event in this series later in the fall will talk about using data visualization to convey your findings. The slides from today's event, events to come, and previous events can be found on the Building Childcare Research Capacity webpage on OPRE's website, and we'll post that link again in the chat. Also, if you have any questions about today's event, feel free to email me, Gretchen Kirby, at gkirby@mathematica-mpr.com. We'll also put that in the chat. And then we'd like to close by asking you for feedback on the event. We have 2 short poll questions that Ivy will put up for you. We'd like to hear from you. First question is, this event was a good use of my time? Strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. And the second question is, I have steps in mind to develop research questions based on what I learned today. I'd love to give you just a minute to fill out these polls, and I hope you will do so before you leave us. I also just want to say thank you so much to Heather, Kathryn, and Tonya for taking the time to present their material and talk with us today. And thank you all for coming. We greatly appreciate you being here. We hope you found it helpful and informative. And we wish you a great day, and hopefully we'll see each other soon. Thank you all.